So for the phase one of emerging tech, I chose to expand on an existing final project that I had from last quarter in Unreal. Um, my goal was to finish the piece and create a more polished version of it, while also adding a title screen and HUD elements to guide the player through the game and to also make it playable. So to take the good foundation that I spent last quarter and just refining it and making it into a finished portfolio piece. So the first thing that I wanted to do was revamp and finish some of the parts that were in the level. Um, so basically, this is where I started off. Um, this is where I ended, and I'm fairly happy with the detail. I spent a lot of time utilizing the Unreal terrain editing and sculpting and trying to use asset packs, the Forest Meadow asset pack and the Infinity Blades Grasslands pack. And those were just the two main ones, and just to try to make an interesting level. So this is what I have. What I wanted to do, so what I started doing for the next one is, as you can see, quick back and forth, refining a lot of things. Major lighting changes. I basically rotated the light and added an extra light, actually. So there's two baked lights in the scene, and they just give me an extra angle of visibility because I was having a lot of issues with that. So I did that, and then I also added a large portion of the map that isn't here. So on my drawing, the map actually went much further. You know, what you're seeing here, what I was able to finish last quarter was about right here. So I pushed out and I completed this whole area, which is the maze area. So I'll just do a quick fly through, and as you can see, I spent a lot of time to really put as much detail as I could into every area, because the main goal of this project is to make it a complete portfolio piece that shows that I can pay attention to detail and build an environment. And it was a great process. So spent a lot of time, spent about 2 weeks really, just trial and error and iterating on and expanding out these areas, and came out pretty cool. This one's a little bluff area right here. Just spent a lot of time just looking at reference pictures that I took and trying to make an interesting layout. So so I did that, and once that was done, I was able to move on to the actual HUD elements. So the main goal with the HUD, first of all, there's a couple different kinds. There's the stamina HUD. So these are all what's called a blueprint widget, and they're basically just class blueprints that pertain to a Photoshop-esque design board here, where you can put in unique options, buttons, images. It works very similar to the canvas element in Unity, but it's honestly, it seems a lot more robust once I got the hang of it. And each of these widgets that you create not only has a visual board attached to it, but it also has a event graph where you can do cool stuff like alter what's on there based on variables and events that happen in the game. This is really useful, as I'll mention, in what's called binding a certain object. So, for example, this one over here, this number goes up as the player interacts with the different statues on the map, and the whole idea is that they have to get 7 of them before the door is able to open. What I can do is bind this text. I believe I already did. Oh, right here. So you click bind and create binding, and what that does is it creates a personal function for that text, so it keeps it updated. So this was kind of just the basic way to do it. In this case, I had to get my variable from a different class, which was the player. So this is kind of, I think, the ideal way to do it is you keep all your variables tied to your player character, and then you do what's called casting to it, and then you pull out the objectives met variable and clamped it to the return in this widget. So there's the stamina. And then I also have the same process here with a stamina bar that I implemented with sprint, which is just a basic sprint mechanic that I implemented on the player character. But I won't go too into depth in this because there's a lot here. But it's basically just taking those values, and I'm doing some UX stuff with the sprint as well. So that's the first element of the UI that I'll show. So you see in the top right, There's that text. It's just a float. And then you have a sprint bar. And how I program the sprint bar is to, when it's at full, if you don't use it for 2 seconds, it'll disappear. And if you use it again, it'll pop up. And I thought that was just some nice little UX to do. And also, if it goes below, I think it's 35% of full, you can't use it until it gets back to 35. And I've also been able to replicate that in the visuals. So you can't use it. It fades to gray, so it's kind of, in the corner of your eye. The player doesn't really see it, and then they notice maybe that change when it becomes full bright at 35, and then they just have a nice little reminder visually that they can use it again. To be honest, in this walking simulator type experience, I'm not sure if I'm even going to have the sprint bar very visible, because it does kind of take away your eye from the environment, which is really what the whole thing's about. It's not so much about gameplay and monitoring your sprint level, but nonetheless, it seemed like a really great first thing to do as far as HUD goes. So I made the player character sprint on button press, and then I was able to bind that to the sprint bar here, and then the statues. So that's the first part of the HUD. The next two parts are narration parts. So the idea here is that these red points are the statues that you have to go to in the level, and the yellow points are the intermittent points, the points that they're just collision boxes that you pass on your way to the other stuff. So they happen, in theory, in the lower points of the level. So the idea is that there's going to be one type of canvas element, blueprint widget that pops up. That's the main interaction with the red ones, and then there's a small version that's just for storytelling while the player's walking. So this allows for a writer. This allows for a writer to. So actually, I'll just show it in game first. So basically, you walk up to this, you interact. So it's running some code right now that's freezing the player input, and switching it to UI only. So once it's doing that, that's what's not allowing me to move the player in the world space, and then it's also triggering a variable Boolean on the player controller class that's a show mouse. So that's all you have to do, and as long as it's also activating this widget, which is just text, 2 buttons, and then there's also a vignette in the background and a small blur. So that just kind of takes you out of it for a little bit. So that's the first interaction. So ideally, those are going to be major story elements or poetry or some type of spoken word that my friend, who's a creative writer, is going to. I sent him a video of the walkthrough, and hopefully he's going to write some stuff for the player to read as they walk through that. And then the next part is collision boxes. So as I choose either pathway here has a giant collider box on it. So when you interact with the path, the next element shows up, which is the small text on the bottom, just as subtitles. So that's kind of going to be used, in this middle point to kind of say some words and some things to keep the player's mind, thinking about something or keeping it interesting, while they're always moving towards the other goal. So these all say the same thing right now. It's just showing the same widget, but the implementation is there, so I just have to make multiple widgets for each of these. And here's a little reveal here. And so the idea here is that this could be a more cinematic experience eventually, where maybe it at this moment the camera pans off, or there's a cut scene or something else happen. There's some animations. This is where some more cinematic moments could happen, and then once it's done, you give the player, because at the end of the day, the main objective was to make an interesting level to walk around. So that stuff is kind of all just kind of backseat to this experience. So obviously, if I was to redo this map, or if I was to make another level again, making it with gameplay in mind would be a very different strategy. So as you can see, more of these blocks. This is some text that I'm trying to get. This is world space text that I haven't bound it yet to the number. So you can see at the top right it says 3 out of 7, but that one's not updated. But everything else seems to work ideally, or in a decent prototyping way. There's possibilities for the different selections by the player to influence later narrations. You know, it'd be easy to each one of these has different buttons and responses, and then those could add points to, you know, different variables that they could influence the story in some way. So that was it for that. So those are the three. So I have the stamina HUD, the narration widget, and the narration walking. So those are kind of coming, those are the storytelling pieces. Now the other parts was just a menu and a pause screen. So currently I have this menu, which is when you hit play and when you start. It locks the player movement just like the other widgets did, shows the mouse, and it just has this simple overlay here, very minimal. Again, I'm trying to keep everything as streamlined and as simplistic as possible, and focus on the UX really, and the environment. So you hit play, and all it really does is give control back to the player, spawns the stamina and the stamina HUD, and lets you play. It's not really a menu screen; it just exists in the same level. I found that this was a better way to do it, but I did also, just for the sake of learning, I have another version, so I basically duplicated the level, and I have a menu screen here. That's a different approach. So this one starts in a different level, and when you hit play, this is running some code that loads this level, and you can see it kind of do its thing there. And I just figured that, I guess it seems that you would have to hide that with a fade or a loading screen of some kind or something, where for this type of experience, it definitely makes more sense to just let the player play let them just go right from the intro scene. There's also a design and kind of experience related problem here, which is this version gives you the ocean reveal, which is kind of like a main part of the level experience right off the bat. So you're seeing it as you start up the game, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to be going here at some point. And then that influences the player's first perspective on the trail, because they already have this in their mind. Then they hit play, and they're dropped into the woods, and then now they go about finding their way to the ocean. But that's just very different from just starting the game up, not knowing what to expect, and being here. Because then this allows for the player to organically, and for the first time, see the ocean when it's revealed to them, like either... Well, I guess they would have to go to this before they go to the door. But this is the main kind of ocean reveal first, and then the door is the next one. So just some design-related things and UX-related things to the experience, but I'm pretty happy with how it's come out. I think I learned a decent amount about how Blueprint widgets work through doing this. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here that I missed. Narration HUD, narration walking, toggled by triggers. I kind of went over this. That's kind of the philosophy behind it. I would love to expand it out possibly more and just make a real long experience with narration and vocal narration and sound changes and things like that, and actually tell a story. But either way, this was a great first take at that. I think I still have a lot more work to do as far as gameplay goes. I mean, this really isn't that. It's just kind of a level. So I would like to learn more about gameplay in programming in Unreal. And then in regards to the widget stuff, I think that the organization here with a lot of the stuff that's happening in these different event graphs, it just got a little messy. I have, various things happening where this narration widget, you have to hit one of these buttons and then it has to run a bunch of code, and then you can get out of it. And it's also adding to the tally of it's adding to the controller's tally of how many statues they've seen. And my point is that the code is kind of it's very spread out and very compartmentalized. And whereas like some of this stuff, particularly with all these different widgets in Unity, it would be like one code, one script, one game manager, one like canvas manager or something could kind of hold all this stuff, and it would be a lot easier to see it all in one place with all your game objects like declared at the top of the script and stuff. Where here, it's like I'm going into here, I'm doing something, and I'm like, okay, well, how do you interact with it? Oh, well, that's actually in the level blueprint, or that's like when the game starts, that's dealing with this, or maybe it's in the class blueprint that has the trigger. So there's just a lot of things kind of in my mind misplaced, and just like it's a little bit tougher to visualize it in some way. The practice of the logic of how to make a specific thing happen has been really great. I think you know, I'm not going to go into all the what each of these things is doing because it would take too long, but um, it's been a good first step, and I think the goal of creating this project and this product that one thing I'll also note, just on a side note, is all of these trees were manually placed. So like all the foliage on the ground I painted in with the terrain tool, but I didn't actually use the terrain tool for the trees. And what that did was it just made it so I could manually adjust the scale and rotation and pivots of everything, and I would place a few trees, and then I would get back down into the player's perspective, and I would move through it, because I really wanted to make sure they all artistically kind of flowed together. And it took a lot of time, but it was honestly, I think it paid off, and I think it makes the level look a lot more organic than some of the levels that you see with larger terrain tools. That being said, obviously this isn't a very scalable kind of workflow for that reason. So I learned a lot from doing this, and I definitely want to do some more work on it before putting it up on itch.io, as far as getting the narration elements in, and maybe taking what I did here and pushing it out towards this area a little bit with the detail. And yeah, I'm not 100% sure on what to focus on for the next sector for this class. I'll be thinking about that right now, but I do want to get this done and potentially work on another level or two, maybe utilizing another skill or emerging tech to get it done. So hopefully I would like to have at least one other level of this quality by the end of the month. That's my goal. So it's a little ambitious, but we'll see. Anyway, that's my presentation for what I learned here with the updating my project and putting in HUD. So start the first of many projects in Unreal. So thanks for watching.